Beyond. I am your host, Mike Payton, along with our other host, Keith Black Trudeau, here to my right. This is a real special episode. I am really excited to do this one. We are going to be covering Mr. Big Shot, Chauncey Billups. What an unbelievable winding career that is just, I mean, it's like a spider web. There's so many different angles to this thing. And I'm looking forward to going through all of them. But obviously, before we do that, we got to spend a few minutes on the thing that everybody wants to talk about, and that is the draft lottery. Obviously, it did not go well, Keith.
Look, if you recall, we had a live reaction to the lottery a year ago, and my reaction was exactly the same. As much as I want the Pistons to be successful, they absolutely deserve to get screwed by the lottery with how anti-competitive they've been for years. I don't know what else to say other than that. They won 17 games a year ago, just blatantly tanking down the stretch, and they followed that up with a 14-win season, which I didn't even think was actually possible. Look, I don't think the lottery is rigged. The Pistons don't deserve to have good fortune at this point. They beat the house on their very first try. Troy's first full season as GM, they executed an almost flawless tank where they lost and they were still very competitive, still tried to win games. And they jumped up and they won the lottery on their very first crack at it. And I think that almost cursed this team for the last 3 years because fans, for some reason, thought that it was easy, or they didn't realize just how long the odds were that the Pistons got Cade Cunningham in their first lottery. They just figured, hey, let's just be bottom three every year. We're going to get top 3 picks every year. Might get Victor Wembanyama. Nope. Here's your pick 5. Here's another pick 5, and here's a third pick 5 for you. You keep going back to the casino, the house always wins. The odds are set up that way.
Yeah, it's incredibly unfortunate. But last year when it happened, I was really mad. This year when it happened, I didn't care. I've been so desensitized by this team being this bad that it's just hard for me to be upset about it anymore. I don't even know how I can be upset.
I have a different reason not to care, and that's because there is no one player in this draft that's obviously a franchise changer. There's no Victor Wembanyama. There's not even a who went number 1 2 years ago. It was Paolo, right? There's no Paolo Banchero in this draft. there's no Cade Cunningham in this draft. There's no Anthony Edwards in this draft. But to be fair, we didn't know Anthony Edwards was going to be this good. He was just clearly the best of what we considered a mediocre class. And this class is seen probably even worse than that one. Look, the Pistons getting 1 and the Pistons getting 5. Look, obviously at 5, you're going to miss out on Alex Sarr. You're probably going to miss out on Zachary Risacher, who I think are at minimum 2 of the 3 top prospects in this draft. But outside of that, I actually do like the way this class sets up for the Pistons. Because they badly need shooting, and there are several excellent shooters at the top of this draft. In terms of finding role players that fill a need, I think the Pistons, if they keep the 5th pick, are going to be set up pretty well, assuming they don't do Arn Tellem another favor, which I'm assuming they won't. Tom Gores is not going to drive his team even worse than it is now.
Well, the guy that I have found myself interested in and who I've seen actually mocked to the Pistons quite a bit is Matas Buzelis.
And that would be the guy I'm talking about.
This guy is fantastic. Let's talk about him. What do you know?
I know that he was fantastic in high school and then went to the G League and couldn't play. I see we're looking at his highlights, and that's great. He's very tall for I don't know what position he plays. Is he a 4? Is he a 3? Definitely not a center. He's not strong enough for that. But what it's not showing you is the fact he was a god-awful shooter in the G League. Wasn't even an acceptable free throw shooter for a guy that's supposed to be a stretch, I guess, a stretch four. He kind of plays like he's a forward, but I don't think he's a fluid enough athlete. There's just so much. The more I watched him, the less I liked him as a prospect. And the fact that his agent is Arntellem's son is just, I'm not panicking as much as most people are, but that's really driving me up a wall because people are assuming the Pistons are going to take him because, if for no other reason than because Arntellem's son is his agent. Like, there are legitimately great shooters at the top of this draft. There are some fantastic shooters. Reed Shepard, Dalton Connect, Rob Dillingham. We don't need to pick a guy that we hope can become a great shooter someday. We've done that enough. And even if we did, I would take Ron Holland because I know Ron Holland is an excellent, or at least a good playmaking defender. Metellus is great at one thing. It's blocking shots. But I don't see the mobility, the lateral mobility from him that would lead me to believe that he's a stretchable 6'11" guy that can go out on the perimeter and guard twos and threes. I don't think he's that mobile. I could be wrong. Look, Matas could be the next great sleeper prospect, but just from where I'm sitting, I see no evidence of that. He's a really tall kid that tried to play in the G League and just bombed out horribly. I look, his entire team bombed out. Let's be fair. The G League Ignite was set up to fail this season, but that's not an excuse for him missing free throws. Like, even in wide open shots, he was still shooting a horrible percentage. I cannot trust him whatsoever. I can't. And the Pistons shouldn't either. They should be in the market for reliable prospects, not taking another home run swing on a guy that could be something, but his floor is a guy that could bust out of the league. I don't know yet.
All right. Well, way to just pour water all over that idea. I was really excited when I watched, obviously, and I watched the highlight reel, but I really liked what I had saw, and I thought, oh, maybe there's a chance there. But I guess
look, I could be wrong. I'm just going to throw that out there. I have been wrong before. I've been very wrong before, but I've also been very right before. And a guy that can't shoot, the Pistons have drafted enough of those guys with the hopes that, okay, it's going to magically happen for them. We're going to teach them how to shoot once they get to the NBA. The Pistons already have several of those guys on their team. Just once, can we get Cade Cunningham, someone that we know can shoot? That would be my objective in this draft. Find Cade Cunningham, someone to pass to in the corner that won't get left alone.
Well, what do you think about the idea? There's some talking going around about the idea of trading for Brandon Ingram.
Okay,
I'm all for it.
Oh yeah, I would be all for it, depending on what they gave up. It shouldn't be too much because the entire league knows at this point that the Pelicans can't afford to keep Brandon Ingram. He's only got a year left in his contract, and he can leave on his own. So, look, as we've seen throughout the years, all of those things drive your trade value down. And Brandon Ingram's still very young, still has all-star talent. I think Cade Cunningham would bring out the absolute best in him because he has been vocal about wanting to take more spot-up threes. And the Pelicans last year didn't really have a point guard at all. And I thought that made Brandon Ingram's job a little bit tougher than it needed to be. So I actually, some people don't like Ingram's fit on the Pistons conceivably. I have a higher opinion of it than that because I think Cade is the type of player to make talented players look better. So I would be excited to see that. The one drawback I have is you're going to want to pay this guy because you're going to have to pay him not to explore free agency. And the only reason you trade for him would be for that reason because you think you can lock him up long term, right? It's the same issue that the Pacers are going to have with Siakam. They're going to have to pay him way more than his market value to not test free agency. The Pistons will be in that same boat with Ingram if they somehow manage to make a deal for him. And you're going to pay him, 50 to 55 million a year, just crazy numbers. The salary cap's going to keep exploding, especially after this new TV deal. So it's not going to cripple you, but you definitely would absolutely need Ingram to be a perennial all-star if you traded for him, because you're going to have to pay him like one.
All right. Well, we'll see where that goes when we get to that point. There is one little quick tiny thing I did want to show you before we got into our main topic today, and I came across this video the other day on Twitter. I'm just going to play it. 1930s basketball for you. Some of the shot form. The shot form is what I really want to talk about, because I don't know what we're doing. What is this? What is that? He doesn't even leave the ground yet. Somehow it goes in.
It's a set shot.
I hate it. I hate every minute of it.
Well, I'm not going to deny that this looks very ugly.
Look at that. Look at that one. What is he doing?
I would give it the caveat that these are hard rims. So players back in the day, it was either a swish. And anyone that's ever played on double rims before knows what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You have to swish those things, or the ball is going to come off the rim. And that's always been my theory with the set shot. Look, they hadn't developed the idea of the jump shot yet. But if you notice the incredible amount of spin they're putting on the ball on these set shots, like, it was not very easy to make. Even though the rim is the same height, it was much harder to make perimeter shots like back in the 40s and 50s and even 60s, because the breakaway rims hadn't been invented yet. There was no give on those things. So the goal wasn't to, today you put some good backspin on the ball. You just want to get it up on the front of the rim. 80 years ago, 70 years ago, you were focused on trying to switch the thing. And that's why everybody shot like 40%, 35%, because it wasn't as easy to make shots. But look, it's not pleasing to look at. I'm right there with you.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, let's get into something that's a little bit more pleasing, and that's Mr. Big Shot himself, Chauncey Billups. Keith, let's go all the way back to Colorado, where we're talking about maybe the greatest Colorado basketball player that ever played.
As of right now, he is. I think Jalen. I think Jalen Williams, the good one out of OKC. I'm pretty sure he's from Colorado as well. So he may have something to say about that, 10, 15 years down the road. But yeah, right now it's pretty comfortably Chauncey Billups. I don't know how many. I tried to look this up before. I couldn't figure it out. How many high school kids have ever been 3-time Mr. Basketball? I know LeBron James was.
Right.
I'm guessing Kareem was in New York. Probably Wilt was in Pennsylvania, but just the list, it cannot be a very big list, right?
It can't be. And not only was he a 3-time Mr. Basketball Colorado, he's the first Colorado Mr. Basketball. Like, the award did not exist until 1993 when he won it. He won the very first one.
That I didn't know.
Yeah, and then won the next 2, obviously. Yeah, an unbelievable high school basketball player at George Washington High School.
Okay, so yeah, it goes without a doubt. His high school numbers were fantastic. He was one of the top players in the country years in a row. Stays home, goes to Colorado, stays there a couple years. Colorado basketball, not a very good. Never has been a perennial basketball powerhouse. He averaged 18, 19 points a game there, 5 to 6 assists, about 37, 38% three-point shoot. Basically all the things you would expect from Chauncey Billups in college. He provided that. Best they could do was a 9 seed in his sophomore season, 22-win season. They actually did advance past the first round. He scored 24 points against Indiana. And then Vince Carter and Antoine Jameson and Ed Cota, that famous late 90s North Carolina team that everyone remembers over the age of 38, just destroyed them in the second round. And that was kind of the end of Chauncey's brief 2-year career at Colorado, which was still very memorable, still one of the best players in Colorado history, even though he only stayed those couple of years.
Well, I was looking at some of the stuff from before he got to Colorado, and you mentioned some of the names already, but he was in the McDonald's All-American game, as so many guys are. But just Paul Pierce is there with him, Kevin Garnett is there with him, Vince Carter. I mean, I would have loved to have seen that McDonald's game with all those guys that would wind up being Hall of Famers.
Yeah, everybody, and everyone, rightfully so, everyone romanticizes that NBA draft class of '96, but that high school class of the high school class of '96 was actually more impressive if you look at the list of names in that All-American game. That's just amazing, the talent that they had for that 1 year.
Well, as you mentioned, he's a All-American at Colorado and one of the best players in college basketball that year. And he's going to go ahead and enter the NBA draft.
Yep.
The Boston Celtics, and with Rick Pitino, have the 3rd overall pick, and they're going to take him.
Well, they had the 3rd and 6th overall picks. As we went over in our 97 draft episode, the Boston Celtics had, because they had not only their pick, they had Dallas's unprotected pick. And this was the Tim Duncan draft. This was seen as Tim Duncan and everybody else. Yeah. And Boston had positioned themselves to have the greatest percentage chance anyone has ever had to win a number 1 pick. Also in part because the Grizzlies were, I think they would have had the second best odds, but they were forbidden as an expansion franchise for winning the lottery. So Boston absorbed those odds as well as their odds, as well as Dallas's odds. It was like 40-some% chance to win the number 1 pick, and they didn't do it. Their pick from Dallas landed at 6. Their own pick landed at 3rd. So going into the draft, it was, even though they had 2 of the top 6 picks, it was seen as mostly a failure in tanking by the Boston Celtics. Rick Pitino, he sees Chauncey Billups as he needs a point guard, and he kind of settles for Chauncey rather than, really going all in and being excited about it. And then picks up Ron Mercer, who he had coached at Kentucky, classic 2-guard, with the 6th pick. And even today, no one gives him flack about this. I don't know why. Tracy McGrady was available at 9. He passed on him twice. So, and this goes back to what I said at the very beginning of our show with, the Pistons getting the 5th pick. Well, yeah, the Pistons got the 5th pick. What are they doing with them? Like, it's possible. Like, look, it's not easy. I'm not saying it is, but it's possible, to find that guy that's the sleeper that's just as good as those top 3 or 4 prospects, but nobody really knows it, right? So that's just a side rant for me. The Pistons need to do better with their 5th pick is what I'm saying. I don't hate any of the guys that they picked, but they could have done better.
Right.
Okay, so Chauncey Billups goes to Boston. Actually has a very memorable debut. One of the most memorable Halloween games in NBA history, where they open their season up, the Celtics do, against the defending champion Bulls with Michael Jordan, and they upset the Bulls. Chauncey Billups comes off the bench, scores 15 points, and quite honestly, that was maybe the best game he had as a Boston Celtic. Because as we all learned that season, Rick Pitino's college-style press, full-court press for the entire game strategy does not work well with grown men or against grown men over a 6-month, 82-game season. Just doesn't happen. It was like Tibbs on steroids. So Billups never really falls out of the rotation for very long. He plays. He actually starts 44 of the 51 games where he was in Boston, but he didn't really look like the third overall pick, which was kind of the problem. It's not that he looked. I don't think Chauncey Billups in any of his stops has ever looked like a bad player. He just hasn't popped. He hasn't impressed. He doesn't look like a guy that was the third pick in his draft, which is kind of what starts to haunt him here. At the trade deadline of his rookie season, it's unheard of for a third overall pick to get traded in the middle of his rookie season, but it happens to Billups. Rick Pitino, who, as you said yourself, not the best general manager, he's feeling the pressure to win now, even though it's his first year as coach. He deals Chauncey Billups to the Toronto Raptors in a deal that brings Kenny Anderson, good old New York City legend Kenny Anderson, who's I think 30 at this point, to Boston. And it's a deal that actually works out well for the Celtics for about 3 or 4 years, because that's about all Kenny Anderson has left in him at this point. But he is a good player for Boston. I'll give him that much credit. And this kind of turns into what happens when you're a high lottery pick and your first team gives up. The team that drafts you gives up on you early. Then you, all of a sudden, you're no longer seen as a high draft pick. You're seen as, a guy. And that justifies every other team for giving up on you, because the team that wasted a third round pick on you, or a third overall pick on you, gave up on you, right? So he goes to Toronto. Actually plays pretty well. 11 points, 3 assist average in 29 games. Some of it's off the bench. Most of it's as a starter. He actually has a pretty good game against the Pistons. It's a video I show once every year where he goes up against Grant Hill in the most ironic matchup ever. They lose the game, but Billups, you can see the makings of what made Billups special in Detroit. But that kind of gets derailed because after his rookie season, we have this long lockout that eats up the first 3 or 4 months of the season. And before he can really get his career going, as soon as the lockout ends in, I think, January of 1999, he gets traded again to his hometown Denver Nuggets. It's a deal that brings a first-round pick back to Toronto, who clearly, at that point, you can read that as they gave up on him, right? They saw Boston give up on him. They didn't see anything really special about him. He was just a solid player, so they gave up on him. So he goes to Denver. And mind you, he's only in his second season. He's on his third team in 2 seasons. He averages almost 14 points a game for one of the worst teams in the league, the Denver Nuggets. But at least they didn't trade him, right? So he comes back the next season. 13 games into the season, he seriously injures his shoulder, and he's essentially done for the year at that point. And the Denver Nuggets give up on him. They trade him at the deadline. And it's not even a trade where they get value for him. They get a smorgasbord from the Orlando Magic of Tariq Abdul-Wahad, Chris Gantling, who was a good player probably 7 years before this deal, and Omar Cook. They got some veteran role players and expiring contracts. And Chauncey Billups never even plays for Orlando because his shoulder's messed up. He's out for the year when they trade him.
Yeah.
So,
Here's the only proof that he ever existed for the Orlando Magic, right there.
He's in the team photo, but he never actually plays a game.
Never plays a game, but he does. You don't see it on any of his basketball cards or his pro basketball reference page or anything. It's just this hidden thing that if you just didn't know about it, you would never ever know.
Yeah, I mean, why would you? He has no statistics that say he ever played in Orlando.
Right.
So we've just gone through the first 3 seasons of Chauncey Billups' NBA career. First one, he was traded halfway through his rookie year. The second season was cut short by a lockout that cut about 40% out. The lockout season in '99 was only 50 games, and he played on the worst team in the league, so there was no playoffs added to that. And then the third season, a month into the year, he's out for the year with an injury. So he's essentially on 4 teams in 3 years as a third overall pick. And to be honest with you, as I said before, I don't think he ever looked like a bust or a bad player. He just looked like an okay player that was picked third overall, that everyone looked at that and they were kind of disappointed with what they saw.
Well, I mean, I don't know if a team doesn't see him as worthy of having. I mean, doesn't that kind of constitute as a bust a little bit?
It
in
does.
that stage?
Well, in their estimation, but like in hindsight, we can clearly say he wasn't a bust.
No, not at all.
He was simply given up on too early. Now, if Chauncey Billups had gone on another 7 years and just had been a backup or had pedestrian numbers, then fine, you could have called that a bust. But I think there's enough evidence for us to say that he wasn't really a bust, and his numbers really don't suggest that he was ever a bust. He didn't get a whole lot of time, but when he got minutes, he produced. It just wasn't anything eye-popping, and teams easily fell out of love with him because he wasn't a superior athlete. Big guy, big combo guard, but he didn't have great court vision, wasn't terribly explosive around the rim. I think he had 2 dunks in his whole career. There was just nothing that got fans out of their seats, nothing that, like, no show-stopping. He was just really solid, and I don't know. I guess a lot of bad GMs, they just look for something that really pops as opposed to something that's just fundamentally very valuable.
Right.
Also, if I can add, he was always a very good 3-point shooter, but we weren't quite into the era yet where that was seen as a tremendous value because guys weren't taking a high volume of threes. And Chauncey Billups was never a great shooter inside the arc. He was always a great shooter outside the arc. So that really hadn't factored into the thought process, I think.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was just showing that video of him hitting a 3-pointer from, like, basically, you know, the logo. Maybe he's ahead of his time. Maybe if he was playing today, I mean, I know we're
if he was playing, and we'll get into that, I'm sure. But yeah, if he was playing today, the volume of threes, and he was always a very comfortable volume 3-point shooter. Yeah, he would have been seen in very high regard today.
Yeah, absolutely. Not that he isn't already seen in high regard, but all right. Well, he's a free agent now, so he's going to get to choose for the first time in his career where he wants to go. Surprisingly, does not stay in Denver, his hometown. But he will be back there at some point, so don't worry about that, Nuggets fan.
Denver was terrible. They were in the middle of the tank business, and if you're a guy like Chauncey and you're looking to save your career, that's not where you want to be.
No, where you want to be is in Minnesota, which I think is probably his most important stop because he got time with Terrell Brandon, time with Sam Mitchell, some of these veterans on this team, on a really good team too.
Yeah. Really good young team. He goes to Minnesota to be a backup, and this is something I want to emphasize. They signed him to be a backup. He gets backup money. His contract with Minnesota, 2 years, $4.7 million. That was less than his rookie scale contract as a number 3 overall pick. He took a pay cut on his second contract. Not many players taken in the lottery have to take a pay cut after their rookie deal is over. James Wiseman may be one. We'll see. So he goes to Minnesota to be a backup. Minnesota already has Terrell Brandon, who I've already gushed over way back in our 91 draft episode. I think he's one of the most underrated point guards ever. There's no issue. Terrell Brandon is the starting point guard for Minnesota. He's, I think, only 30 at this point. Still very effective. And Billups, he gets some stability for the first time in his career. Primary backup, averages 9 points, 3 assists coming off the bench. Solid shooting numbers. They make the playoffs. They get destroyed by the Spurs. He doesn't really play a whole lot. He plays 27 total minutes, scores 1 basket in the playoffs. That's it. That's all you get out of Billups his first season in Minnesota, because Brandon was the guy. He was the guy making playing 40-some minutes a game. But that's fine, because Billups has established himself as a value. Minnesota's not in a hurry to trade him. But really, that second year in Minnesota is what changes the rest of his career, because that's when Terrell Brandon starts to get hurt. So about halfway through the season, Terrell Brandon, who had knee problems most of his career, I couldn't find any specific one instance where he blew out his ACL, or it's just the knees. I think it's a cumulative thing where there's just the knee pain and the knee injuries just got too much, and they just had to shut him down for the year as a precaution. But Billups, that's his big opportunity. He moves right into the starting lineup with Kevin Garnett. They form an incredible pick and pop combo. His numbers jump up to 15 points, 7 assists. It starts the last 33 games of the season. He goes to Dallas in the playoffs and just lights it up. Now, I should note that Minnesota got swept in the series, 3-zip. They didn't win a single game. Dallas, it was a 4-5 matchup. Dallas just crushed them. Dirk was unguardable. But Billups makes a whole lot of money for himself. Averages over 22 points a game, 6 assists, over 40% from 3. I don't want to say he was Minnesota's best player in the series, but he was a close second behind Kevin Garnett. He was that good. And I remember watching the series specifically and being really, really impressed by Billups and how he was able to maneuver Minnesota's offense and I don't think he missed an open shot that whole series. He was so good. Dallas just had too much firepower. But that sets Chauncey Billups up, still very young at this point. I think he's only 24, 25, to be one of the most highly sought after free agent point guards in the free agent class of 2002. Mike, I think your mic is on mute.
Here's where things get a little interesting. We've talked about this on the podcast a couple of times. I remember, I think it was James Edwards who initially brought this up. But when it came down to finding a free agent point guard for this Pistons team, Chauncey was an option, but he wasn't the only option. It was either him or Jeff McGinnis. Can you talk about that, Keith?
Oh, absolutely, I can, because I remember this like it was yesterday. Jeff McGinnis, coming off of a good season from the LA Clippers. Now, Jeff McGinnis is more of a true point guard, a little bit more athletic than Chauncey, not as big. Certainly not the shooter Chauncey is, but look, it's a laughable comparison now, but here are the numbers that we were faced with going into that free agency class. The Pistons desperately need a point guard, right? Jeff McGinnis, 14.6 points per game, 6.2 assists. Billups, 12.5 points per game, 5.5 assists. That doesn't tell the whole story because Billups was coming off the bench for half the year. But it was a more of a debate than people realize at the time. Billups, of course, was going to cost more because he had the name. He had the big playoff performance. But there definitely was some talk of, do we really need to spend, all this money on Billups? He's going to get more money than any of the free agent point guards out there, but we can maybe get McGinnis for less and then have enough money to go get somebody else. That was kind of the discussion at the time. But the Detroit Pistons, and we went over this in our Joe Dumars episode, I give him a lot of credit. He had played against Billups as a professional. he had certainly seen something that gave him the ultimate faith that Billups could be the point guard, the franchise point guard, and he was right. He goes straight to Billups. He says, look, we can offer you the same mid-level exception that 10 other teams are going to offer you, but what we are going to offer you also is you can move right in and start day one for a team that won 50 games last season in a weaker Eastern Conference. You can make your name with us as opposed to these 10 other teams because we've already been proven that we're a winning organization. And I guess that sold him because just with using just the mid-level exception, which again most everybody else had to spend, Billups decides very quickly to sign with the Detroit Pistons. 5 years, $35 million.
It's a pretty good deal. Not bad at the time. Speaking of making a name, pretty early on, he makes a nickname for himself that everyone now knows.
Okay, so I'm going to preempt that just a little bit because I think we have to talk about how much he struggled before prior to that.
Let's do it.
Chauncey Billups and Rick Carlisle had his guys. Chauncey Billups not very familiar with the way Carlisle liked to play his system. Chauncey Billups doesn't log a single fourth quarter minute until his third or fourth game as a Piston. He is constantly sitting in the fourth quarter watching Chucky Atkins finish games. The first 25 games of Chauncey's first season in Detroit, 11 points, 3 assists. That was his average. He was shooting okay, but he was doing the exact same thing that made 4 other teams give up on him, where he was just not asserting himself. He wasn't doing anything. So he was just being solid. And about halfway through the season, they kind of have to encourage him to really go for it. Look, you're the guy on this team. You need to be a little bit more selfish. And as you said, towards the end of the season, oh boy, does he catch fire. The most memorable performance to me is when he just absolutely crushes the Lakers, Kobe and Shaq at the Palace, breaks the long Pistons losing streak to Kobe and Shaq. But what I'm sure you're referring to is the Mr. Big Shot moments.
Well,
go ahead.
Well, there's one against the Warriors.
Yeah, that's his very first one. To me, that's the birth of Mr. Big Shot. The one against the Warriors where the Pistons had absolutely no business winning that game. I remember it because it was so frustrating to watch. The Warriors were not good. Pistons played terribly, and they had no business winning. But Billups doesn't even get a good shot off. He just fires, I think, over Chris Mills, just fires a 28-foot three that hits nothing but net, and it goes from a 2-point loss to a 1-point win. One of my favorite buzzer beaters of all time. But
yeah, I believe. Well, never mind. I thought we had it, but that is not it. What I do have is the other game, which was a short period of time later, which people are crediting as the one where he actually does get the nickname, and that's the game against the Atlanta Hawks.
So yeah, this was all right. So the game against the Warriors was March 9th. 3 weeks later, or 2 weeks later, March 26th. And look, this is a very long line of buzzer beaters. It's not those two. Chauncey Billups led, I think, the entire NBA in clutch field goals that season in 2002, 2003. December 20th, hits a late three to tie the Celtics. January 10th, hits a late 2 to tie the Hornets, send that to overtime. January 18th, hits a late 3 with just a second left to tie the Indiana Pacers. February 19th, hits a 3 with, I think, 10 seconds left to take the lead against Toronto. It is a very, very long list of clutch baskets, and the Atlanta one is the final one, and maybe that's when they started calling him Mr. Big Shot. I don't remember 100%, but he had this magical, and it was clear, this magical ability to stay calm in a make or miss situation, or a make or lose situation, and consistently over and over again find a way to get a shot off and make it. That to me, that's the story of the whole 2003 season. Was Chauncey Billups hitting clutch shots, and it continued into the playoffs.
Well, the Pistons are going to get bounced early by the not early, late by the Nets.
Well, let's take the road that he takes to get there. So, and this is very important because the first series against the Orlando Magic, where the Pistons are going in as the 1 seed, Orlando's the 8 seed with Tracy McGrady. They can't guard Tracy McGrady. He's killing them. They win Game 5 at the Palace. They're still down 3-2. Chauncey Billups has his highest scoring game as a Piston in Game 6 in Orlando. Scores 40 points. Comes back a couple of days later, scores 37 more in Game 7 at the Palace. It is not only the most points any Piston has ever scored in a Game 7. It is also the most playoff points any Piston has ever scored in 2 consecutive games, those 77 points. And I know we remember that series a lot for Tayshaun Prince's coming of age, for Tracy McGrady kind of, shooting himself in the foot, with the whole "it's great to be out of the second round" thing, and Orlando collapsing. But none of that's possible without Chauncey Billups just absolutely annihilating Orlando's guards, Darrell Armstrong and Jacques Vaughn. So we go to the second round, and oh my God, this is something that still makes me angry to this day. You know how there's a rule today that you can't slide your feet under a shooter? It's a flagrant foul now. And everyone remembers that for Zaza Pachulia on Kawhi Leonard. But that was an accident. He didn't do that on purpose. That rule should be named the Eric Snow rule, because he and Bruce Bowen did that repeatedly against everybody. And Chauncey Billups in Game 1 in that second round of this in that second round series is just killing Eric Snow. Chauncey is. He can't guard him. So late, I want to say early in the fourth quarter, Chauncey goes up for a 15-footer, makes the shot, and Eric Snow, he tried to put both feet under Chauncey's ankles. He manages to get one, but it's one of the most blatant, I'm trying to hurt you plays I have ever seen on defense from a guy fouling a jump shooter. And Chauncey, I don't know how Chauncey didn't break his ankle. It was bad. And from that point on, Chauncey misses Game 2, Game 3. He tries to play, I think, in Game 4, manages 5 minutes, clearly too hurt to play. Pistons win Game 5. They're up 3-2 going into Philadelphia. But Chauncey does get to play the hero. One of his best playoff performances on a ankle that he can barely move. I put this almost up there with Isaiah Thomas, except Isaiah did his in the finals. But Chauncey scores 28 points, hits 3 3-pointers in overtime, and he is the entire reason the Pistons win that series in 6 games in Philadelphia. Now, you're I'm sure going to mention that they're going to go to New Jersey and get their asses kicked, which they did. But it should be noted that Chauncey Billups was still playing on a very badly sprained ankle. Look, injuries are part of the game. I'm just saying, Jason Kidd destroys Chauncey Billups in that conference final. And there is a reason why it never happened again whenever they matched up. I'll leave it at that. Eric Snow, I still hate you. Your mic's on mute again.
Michigan State all the way. Go green. You got to do what you got to do. You got to slide your feet out here, Keith. If you're not cheating, you're not trying.
Well, that's the thing. They didn't even, because it wasn't a foul back then. They didn't even call a foul on the play, I don't think. And Billups made the shot. It's just I looked at it earlier today because I thought maybe it wasn't as egregious as I remember it. Nope. In fact, it might have been worse because he wasn't even trying to contest the shot. He was just sliding his feet under Chauncey's feet while he was in the air. And Chauncey's not a very big jumper, so you really have to make a point to get your feet under there.
Well, one more thing to touch on that first Pistons season is that he's actually in the running for the Most Improved Player award. Yep. Finishes 6th in votes. Gilbert Arenas wins that year as a member of the Warriors. Matt Harpring was in 2nd, Troy Murphy in 3rd, some guy named Tony Parker, never heard of him, in 4th, and then Ricky Davis in 5th. I don't know. I don't see how any of those guys could be ahead of Chauncey. I mean, Ricky Davis did have a fantastic year for the Cavs that season.
I can sort of see it, but again, I don't like giving the Most Improved award to a guy that just because he got more minutes. I don't think Chauncey was ever a bad player. I just thought he didn't get the opportunity. Troy Hudson, I remember specifically, he improved dramatically.
Troy Murphy.
I'm sorry?
Troy Murphy.
Oh, it wasn't Troy Hudson. Okay.
Yep.
I know Troy Hudson had a year where he was in the running as well. But yeah, no, you're right. Gilbert Arenas, I would almost say the same thing, but we didn't really know how good Gilbert Arenas was at that point.
I would have thought that if he were going to get it at any point, it would be his first year in Washington where he really took off and you started to go, okay, well, I guess this guy could be a superstar maybe. But
yeah, he never really impressed much in college, and he was a 2nd-round pick, and all of a sudden they put him on the court and he blew up. And of course, Golden State paid for it because as a 2nd-round pick, they couldn't afford to re-sign him.
All right, well, let's talk the 2004 season. I mean, this is one of the big ones here, obviously. So we can skip right to the playoffs. Or we can go,
yep.
We can skip to the playoffs or go to the regular season, however you want to do it.
Okay, well, I think you have to start in the offseason because in the offseason, Rick Carlisle gets let go, so they could bring in Larry Brown. And Rick Carlisle and Larry Brown, both great coaches, they could not be any more different. So Larry Brown is more of a purist. He wants a pure point guard type, which Chauncey never was. But he does actually go about trying to teach him to be better at the job, which I think Chauncey gave him credit for. And look, Chauncey's numbers, they don't pop at you. 16.9 points per game on a Pistons team that played a very slow pace. So you have to take that for what it's worth. His one memorable performance that I can recall is scoring 14 points in the 4th quarter against the Spurs that earned the Pistons franchise record 13th straight win. But really, let's talk about the playoffs. And this is interesting because he really struggles. Against the Pacers, he averages 12 points, shoots a whopping 30% in a real rock fight. Against the Nets, the round before, also not very good. Everyone remembers that half-court shot that he hit 20 years ago to, I want to say, last Tuesday. It was like the 20th anniversary of that. Chauncey, if you look at Chauncey's basic stat line, 31 points, 10 assists, 8 rebounds. I mean, that's a hell of a stat line, right? But he also shot 9 out of 29. He got those numbers because it was a triple overtime game, but he did not play well. But he does show up with 22 points in Game 7, which is a blowout. But the fact remains, going into the finals against the Lakers, Billups was actually kind of seen as an afterthought because Rip Hamilton was the guy that really lit up the Pacers the round before. So he was the guy that I think drew most of Los Angeles's attention rather than Chauncey. And that was, and Phil Jackson wrote about this himself, that was a very bad mistake, was focusing on Rip defensively, game planning against him and not Chauncey. Because this is his moment in the finals, going up against an aging Gary Payton, who wasn't quite as quick as he used to be. Chauncey Billups just lights up Gary Payton. 21 points, 5 assists, which doesn't sound special. He shoots over 51% from the floor, 47% from 3, gets to the line 8-9 times a game. against the Lakers, which is enormous. Shoots 92% from the foul line. Look, any number of guys could have won Finals MVP, but Billups had clearly the best offensive numbers, and they gave it to him. It was well-deserved. But Billups becomes one of the very few players to win Finals MVP before being named an All-Star. Just a very unique tidbit of NBA history that very few people have ever pulled off. Shout out to Cornbread Maxwell.
Cornbread Maxwell?
Yep, Cornbread Max. You don't remember Cedric Maxwell?
Oh, Cedric Maxwell. I don't remember. I never called him Cornbread.
Oh, his name was always Cornbread Maxwell.
I never knew that. I never knew that. Honestly. Cornbread Maxwell. I like it. I'm going to call him that from now on. Sad that he's not playing anymore, so I could really take part in the whole cornbread thing. But yeah, Chauncey was, electric in the finals.
Yep.
You knew in Game 5 when that thing was coming to a close. I don't think there was any question as to who. I think some people thought maybe Ben Wallace would win it, but Chauncey was just unstoppable.
Yeah, there was a lot of weird takes, like let's give the MVP to the whole team, or like that's what the championship is. Like let's give it to Larry Brown, like he's not a player. Like no one really knew what to make of this 04 Pistons team, which I think even today no one really knows what to make of them. They're such a fun story. We'll go over them at some point as a team, but so Billups goes into that 2005 season. Everyone's thinking it's almost like Jamal Murray, where everyone's thinking, okay, this is going to be his breakout year. He's going to finally get named to the All-Star team, and he doesn't, because that Pistons brawl happens, and because of that, the Pistons start very slowly. They struggle. Billups, by his standards, struggles. Not named an All-Star, but what does happen for him is he gets named to the All-Defensive team for the first time. And it's weird because Billups is not very quick. He very much has problems with smaller, quicker guards. But the neat thing about that Pistons team is that he cross-matched with Rip Hamilton a lot, because Rip Hamilton did have the quickness. Rip Hamilton was often guarding Chauncey's matchup, and Chauncey was guarding Rip's. Chauncey was very strong, big, had great hands. He was almost like a Joe Dumars light on defense, where he could match up against twos and sometimes threes. And because he was so intelligent on defense, had such good positioning, that he was an effective defender. But I always thought it was weird that Chauncey and not Rip was constantly named to the all-defensive team when Rip was guarding what should have been Chauncey's matchup most of the time.
What's interesting is he makes the all-defensive team too, but then you go and you look at the defensive player of the year guys that were getting votes. He's not even one of them. It goes all. There's like 21 people on here.
It's a different panel that votes for both of those. I think it's the media that votes for defensive player of the year. I don't want to say it's the coaches that I forget exact. I do know it's a completely different set of voters for defensive player of the year and all defensive team.
Keith, who is Trenton Hassel, and why did he get like the 14th most votes that year?
Trenton Hassel was Minnesota's 3-and-D guy, even though he wasn't. He was mostly just all D, just not a very good shooter. But he was like the energy defensive guy. He was like the guy that took old ass Sam Cassell and Latrell Sprewell's toughest matchups whenever the Timberwolves came up against a matchup problem. And Minnesota had, I think, the best record in the West that season. So that's probably. Oh no, that was 2005. You said Trenton Hassel got votes in 2005?
2005.
I was thinking 2004. So in 2005, I'm not. Is he still in Minnesota at that point?
Yes.
Well, I would say the same thing, because I think Cassell and Sprewell were still in Minnesota, I think, in 2005, even though they weren't very good that year. But yeah, Trenton Hassel is one of those guys that kind of just made a name for himself by being a really good defender and not much else.
Yeah, there you go. What about the playoffs in 2005? What kind of an impact was he getting back to the finals?
Yeah. So And again, I'm sorry?
The way you're talking makes it seem like not great.
And this is kind of Chauncey's legacy for the next couple of years, where he has some playoff performances where in the second round against Indiana, he's better, but still not very good. Third round against Miami, he is okay. Doesn't really stand out until he gets to the finals, and he just lays into Tony Parker. Just absolutely demolishes Tony Parker after the first couple of games. Just outclasses him in every it's kind of weird to say that Chauncey Billups could have very easily been a 2-time Finals MVP, but I think that's exactly what would have happened if Rasheed Wallace hadn't let Robert Horry just take a wide open practice shot from 3, which we won't need to get into.
No, we don't need to talk about it.
But yeah, that was like one of Billups' best games too, and if for whatever reason Billups played much better against Western Conference teams than he did against Eastern Conference teams. I have no explanation for that. The West was clearly the better conference, but Billups' numbers were always better against the West, and I don't understand why.
Yeah, that's strange. Well, 2006, Keith, is going to be, I mean, it's the year. Like, this is the best year of Chauncey's career. He's 5th in MVP voting, makes his first all-star team. He's all-NBA second team, all-defensive NBA second team. Just an unbelievable career season.
Yeah, and a lot of old Piston fans are going to cringe at me for this, but I think you can credit Flip Saunders for a lot of that. Flip comes over from Minnesota. He replaces Larry Brown, who's been let go. And Flip, much more of an offensive mind. I think it's sad, very, very tragic that he wasn't born 20 years late, because he would be awesome today. Rest in peace, Flip Saunders. But I think Chauncey and Rip are the ones that benefit most from his offensive scheme. A little bit more freedom, a bit more ability to get their own shots. Chauncey, not only his averages jump up to 19 points, 9 assists, which doesn't scream MVP to anybody, but also you have to take into account not only are his per minute assists at a career high, but his per minute turnovers are a career low. He is incredibly efficient. He 43% from 3, and he's 5th in the league in 3-pointers made that season. Not only is he shooting a very high percent, like he's putting up Steve Nash type percentages on an even better volume. That's how good he was. And I know you're showing this clip right now. It's probably his best game of that season, where he goes up against Steve Nash, who was the MVP that season, and just kicks his ass for 4 quarters. Just a great season for Chauncey. And because the Pistons had their best season ever, they started 37-5. Yeah, the Pistons were that good once. And they finished with a franchise record 64 wins. So, yeah, Billups gets a lot of MVP votes. He goes from a guy that never made an All-Star game to getting MVP votes. How about that? But unfortunately, once again, his season comes kind of crashing down, and he unfortunately saves his last game, he saves his worst game for last. So, the Pistons the year before in 2005 had knocked off the Miami Heat in the conference finals. 2006, they had a rematch, and it didn't go the same way. Miami had loaded up a little bit. They were a little bit deeper, a little bit better, a little bit more motivated. They had a lot of guys that were basically in their last chance to win anything, so they were locked in. Pistons fall down 3-1. They managed to win Game 5 at the Palace. They go to Game 6 for Miami, and who else but Jason Williams, friggin' white chocolate Jason Williams, one of the least efficient long-range shooters of any starting point guard, catches fire because Billups is just leaving him open to help on Wade and Shaq, and Jason Williams makes him pay. Makes 10 out of 12 shots, 5 out of 5 from 3-point range. Just does not miss pretty much the entire game. And Billups has maybe his worst game as a Piston. Shoots 3 out of 14 It is a very, very painful game. I remember this one as well. It was just one of those, everything goes right for the other team and nothing goes right for you. Pistons had many of those games go their way in the past. This is really the first time I ever saw it happening to them. But yeah, it's kind of sad that's how Billups' best season ends, because he was so good prior to that.
Jason Williams, man, is the only non-Piston I think we could probably do an entire show on. I would love to do it. Love that guy. Big fan.
All right. So, and really for the next 2 years, it's kind of more of the same. 2007, Billups is 90% as good as he was the year before. Actually has a pretty good playoff series against the Bulls in the second round. 19 points a game, 40% shooting. But his season ends almost exactly the same way it does the year before, where he only scores 9 points in Game 6 in Cleveland as opposed to Game 6 in Miami. And Boobie Gibson, of all people, once again, a guy he's doubling off of because that's a guy that you want to make beat you. Well, Boobie Gibson, of all people, does beat the Pistons in Game 6 and eliminates them with 31 freaking points. I can't even say it 30. It has to be 31 freaking points because I still can't believe he had that type of a shooting performance.
Daniel Boobie Gibson, of all people.
Yep. 2008, I will say this, at least 2008 wasn't the trilogy. Okay, unfortunately, Billups gets injured in the second round against Orlando. Comes back against Boston. He's really the Pistons' best player in that series. Well, I'd say Rip was, but Billups is right there. Game 6 at the Palace. Man, he's actually the best player on the floor, really. Scores 29 points, high score for the entire game for either team. But really, he's the only Piston that showed up in that game, ironically. Pistons get eliminated by Boston once again for the third straight time in Game 6 of the conference finals. And even though they don't break it up immediately, that's kind of where it ends.
Yeah, it's well, we all know what's happened next, right?
Yep.
2009.
Yep. The
come up
the Iverson trade. Yep.
And and he does start the season with the Pistons. Plays 2 games with them, and then the trade happens. Yep. He's heading to Denver.
Yeah, so this is, again, I said this in our Dumars episode, this was really about Iverson's expiring contract. It wasn't because Dumars thought that Iverson was a better fit or a better player than Billups at that point. It was just he wanted cap space so he could reset it. Billups, meanwhile, goes on to just have one of the best seasons of his whole career. Statistically, this might be the best season of his whole career, going to play in Denver in 2009 with Carmelo Anthony. He goes up against Chris Paul in the first round, gives him one of the probably the most savage beating Chris Paul's ever suffered in his entire career. Averages 23 points against him, shoots 65% from 3. The Nuggets just annihilate New Orleans in 5. It's not even close. Then he goes to up against Dallas in Jason Kidd in the second round, kicks his ass. Averages almost 22 points a game, shoots 43% from 3. All of a sudden, the Denver Nuggets, who hadn't won a playoff series since Dikembe Mutombo, all of a sudden they're in the conference finals now that they have Chauncey Billups. He changes them immediately. And they actually give the Lakers a much better fight than the Lakers had in the finals against the Magic. It's just that Lakers team was just on a mission, and they had, a few too many weapons for the Nuggets. But yeah, it's not that America didn't know who Chauncey Billups was, but he almost had to remind America, like, don't disrespect me. I am one of the top 5 point guards in this game. I don't care what his numbers say. He is.
Yeah, and I remember. I was just going to say, I remember, the trade goes down and the season's over for the Pistons, and it didn't go very well. And I'm just, I'm watching Chauncey play for the Nuggets, and just, I guess that was kind of the first time that I was ever like, man, I wish that trade didn't happen.
Well, I mean, there was a lot of, especially how Allen Iverson kind of conducted himself, and it was just, we've been over this, but the whole thing was bad.
Right.
And look, in retrospect, I think Dumars would not have done it the same. I think he would have kept Billups and traded somebody else at the very least, or maybe kept the whole gang together for one more run. So, and the sad thing is that the Nuggets really don't get a second chance, right? They get injured. I think Carmelo got injured the next season. The Nuggets really couldn't put together another run. And then the following season after that, Carmelo demands out of Denver. He demands a trade. And Chauncey Billups almost has to go with him to match salaries for the trade package that they put together with the Knicks. Like, Billups didn't want to leave Denver, but almost because Carmelo wanted to leave, Chauncey had to go with him because of the contract. And that's how you treat a guy that, that drove you to the conference finals 2 years before, where you're kind of treating him like just an expiring deal. That never sat right with me. And the Knicks didn't even want him. Like, the Knicks literally let him go after the season. It was just, I always felt bad for Chauncey the way that wound up. And he goes to the Clippers. Could have been the missing piece for that early 2010s Clippers team. But, of course, he tears his Achilles, and he's never the same. And I don't want to call this a happy ending, but it's a fun ending where he comes back to Detroit for his last season. Has that memorable opening night. It's kind of weird thinking about Chauncey Billups playing with guys like Andre Drummond and Greg Monroe, but he did. And I think KCP. But, yeah, that opening night scores 10 points in the fourth quarter against the Wizards. Kind of gives everyone the impression that, hey, the old Chauncey's back, and of course he wasn't. That was really all he had left in the tank. Spends most of the season on the injured list. It's really just a ceremonial farewell season for him in Detroit. But you know what? I'm still glad it happened. I'm glad he and Joe Dumars were able to make up after that terrible trade.
Yeah, it was cool. It was kind of like when Ben Wallace came back as well, and a couple other things. But just saying goodbye. I guess it was only 19 games. Nothing special happened other than that game against the Wizards that we're showing you right now. But yeah, it was cool to I always looked at that kind of like when a player will sign with a team for a day just so he can retire with that team type situation. Only he signed for 19 days.
So,
well, that's going to do it for his career because he is out of the league after that.
Yep.
And now we know him as the head coach of the Portland Trail Blazers.
Well, today anyway. Tomorrow, who knows? Yeah.
Well, I guess that begs the question, Keith, because I know people are going to be asking it. What are your thoughts on a possible reunion with Chauncey as a coach? Or president of basketball?
I really don't like nostalgia-based coach hirings. That they almost never work out. What has Chauncey Billups done in Portland to prove that he's worthy of another shot? That's my question. I honestly don't. I can't answer that. Look, Portland is a bad team, just like similar to the Pistons. So I get why they lose. But I didn't see anything where he was driving them to win games that they shouldn't have won either. It's like asking if Bill Laimbeer should be. And Bill Laimbeer actually has a coaching resume that of winning in the WNBA. Chauncey might be a good coach. I just don't think he would be the right coach for this situation. I think they need somebody. I don't know. I don't know what they need at this point. But it would bother me if they hired him as coach. Simply because I would have in the back of my mind, the only reason they're doing it is to appease fans.
What about president of basketball operations?
What's his resume there? That's because I know he almost took over the Cavs one time, but it's like,
what's a lot of guys' resumes? I don't know. Some guys just get the job. Sometimes
you got to cut your teeth first, though. You have to cut your teeth. Even Joe Dumars, when he took over the Pistons, took a year, step back, and let somebody else run the team in front of him. I think it was Rick Sund run the team, and he just sat back and watched. That's the very minimum I need from a guy that's president of basketball operations. You need to have some executive experience. I don't care if you're an assistant answering phones. You need something that shows me that you're willing to at least pay your dues, or at least you've watched somebody else that knows what they're doing. I would never want a president of basketball operations that's never had a front office job before. That would terrify me.
Okay, well, we already answered the question of could Chauncey play today. There's no doubt he'd be incredible. He'd be maybe even a better player than he was when he actually played. What's his legacy? What's Chauncey's legacy at the end of the day?
It's almost entirely as a Detroit Piston. I think his legacy in Denver has kind of been overshadowed by the recent success where, those aren't the good old days anymore. These are now the good old days for the Denver Nuggets. But look, Chauncey Billups' final year in Detroit was the same. That was the last time the Pistons were any good. As long as they're struggling to replicate their past success, I think Chauncey Billups will be seen as the last great Detroit Piston. At least that's his legacy for right now. That's about as well as I can say it. And look, the playoffs didn't always go the way that, and I think people have kind of forgotten about this because he's known as such a clutch player. The playoffs didn't always go the way that everyone expected them to go for Chauncey, but that 2004 finals you cannot ever take away from him. And the 2005 finals also, he was amazing. So he more than made up for whatever letdowns that he had with amazing clutch performances.
Yeah, no, I mean, he was Mr. Big Shot. When I think of him, I think of that 2004 finals. I think of that huge shot against the Nets. Even though they lost that game in triple overtime, it was still like, I remember where I was when that moment happened in my parents' basement with my brother. We were going crazy.
Yeah, Chauncey never gave up. He looked like a guy that thought that he was going to bank home a half-court shot to get this to overtime. Like he had that focus on him. I always thought that was cool.
Yeah, just one of the more interesting careers in NBA history as well. Just a guy who, seemingly was going to be just a guy and turned into, one of the best players in the league there for a minute.
Yeah, he was drafted to be a star, and then everyone thought of him as just a guy. And then later on in his career, he turns into the star that he was drafted to be to begin with.
Well, I am, that was a fun show. I am looking forward to next week's episode.
But
we are going to be.
We do have a question before you get into that.
Oh, we got a question.
Yeah.
Someone wants to know something. All right. Let's see what we got here.
JWowen33 would like to know would we trade Jaden Ivey for Jalen Suggs, or would we trade Jalen Duren for Lively? I would trade Ivey for Suggs in a heartbeat. I don't see why Orlando would. That would be insane. Suggs, right. One of the best young two-way guards that there is right now in the league. He's, as defensive guards go, he's always been very good, and he's developed a reliable three-point shot over this past year. I don't know why we would even entertain that trade, because I think the Pistons would win that hands down. Duren for Lively, again, I don't know why Dallas would really. I don't know why either team would do that, to be honest with you. Lively's already got the chemistry with Kyrie and Luka, and I don't think Lively is that great defensive presence that the Pistons are going to need if they're going to replace Duren. So, I guess to me, first question, a very, very loud yes. The second one, a soft no.
I trade Duren for Blake Lively any day of the week. We'd love to have her in Detroit. She's great. And she brings Ryan Reynolds with her too. So I mean, it's just a win-win all around. I do have to bring this one up here. Bleacher Report put out a trade scenario today. Let's see what Keith thinks about this. So the Pistons, or excuse me, the Pistons would send Asar Thompson, Jaden Ivey, and the 5th pick to the Atlanta Hawks.
Better be a lot coming back.
To the Atlanta Hawks for DeJounte Murray and the number 1 pick in the 2024 NBA.
Oh, yeah, I remember seeing this one. So let me get this straight. We're trading everyone but Jalen Duren to get the number 1 pick back when the number 1 pick in this draft is almost definitely going to be a center.
Yes. Yeah, seems that way. Yeah.
So, that's going to be a no for me. Even though I think the Hawks get ripped off in this trade. It's still going to be a no from me because why are the Pistons doing this? Like, if you want to get DeJounte Murray, by all means, go get DeJounte Murray. Why are we paying an upcharge for the number 1 pick when we're not? That doesn't feel like I would love to have Alex Sarr, but Jalen Duren's got to go somewhere. We can't have Alex Sarr and Jalen Duren and Isaiah Stewart. We're not doing this again. We need to have pieces that fit. I don't understand the logic of that trade for either team, to be honest with you.
No, I don't either. It makes absolutely no sense to me whatsoever. Anyways, moving on. So our next week's show, which will not be our final show, we are going to be doing something. Actually, you know what? After what we're doing on next week's show, it might be our final show, Keith. We are going to be doing a watch along with you guys of Dennis Rodman's Bad as I Wanna Be. It's a TV movie that was made about Rodman. Here's the trailer for you guys to watch. Check this out.
The family that embraced him.
Making your own way comes with a price.
The daughter that loved him. And the mother who never gave up.
I raised you to be a man.
This is who I am.
Discover the man behind the makeup.
I love you more than anything in this world.
The Dennis Rodman story, Bad as I Wanna Be, ABC Sunday.
So yeah, that's what we're doing next week. We will do a live watch along where we'll have plenty of comments to talk about the things. I'm sure there's going to be just a whole ass ton of inaccuracies and whatever. It's going to be bad, but I cannot wait to see this thing. And we will see you guys next week.